Well, in 1991, a little rock band from Athens, Georgia by the name of REM hit it big. And specifically, it was one song that got them multiple Grammy Awards, got them on radio all over America, and even got them on that devil's TV station, MTV. Anybody remember the name of this song? The song was called Losing My Religion. And they would tell you the song was not literally about losing your religion, but more about that southern kind of phrase, you're losing my religion, which all of us at times do figuratively lose our religion. For me, as a sports fan, this is almost always going to happen at a sporting event, okay? And so I was at the national championship game a month ago, and a lady sits down next to me, and she recognizes me immediately from Athens Church, to which she says, "Oh no, this means I have to be on my good behavior." To which I say, "Me too," which I am not always apt to do at a sporting event. But there are times that we figuratively lose our religion, and then there are times when we literally lose our religion. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk to anybody today, or anybody watching online, anybody down in the theater, who feels like you're having a crisis of faith, that your faith is holding on by a thread today, maybe just for everything that's happened in these last 2 to 5 years. And maybe that's not you. Maybe you're here and you're not in a crisis of faith, and praise God, but I think today's still gonna be really helpful for you, because the friends or family members that you have that have taken a step or seem to have taken a step back from the faith that they grew up in, or the faith that they grew up in is not working as well for them these days, they're not crazy. And it's not that they've changed. There's something much bigger happening. And my belief is, and my opinion is, that it's not just religious people doubting religious things, but that everyone, pretty much everywhere, is doubting pretty much everything all the time, that our world is drowning in doubt, right? And we could talk about how many times you change your outfit or shoes on a given day. Ladies, we're looking at you in particular. But it's just everywhere. I remember, again, as a sports fan, when this entered the sports world, it was Deflategate. Remember Deflategate? It's like, surely this wholesome, upstanding organization like the New England Patriots, right, with these noble men like Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, would not cheat to gain a competitive advantage in sports. But then doubt entered the sports world. Kids, you'll never believe this, but when I grew up, people really trusted science, right? We really believed in science. Now we doubt science, or you have your science and I have my science, or better yet, you have your news and I have my news, and if you don't like my news, you'll just call it fake news, right? This is real. I have a 6-year-old, okay, and the other day I kind of called her out on something she was doing she shouldn't have been doing, to which she said, "Daddy, that's fake news." She's 6. That really happened. Okay, so we are in a post-truth culture. It's not just religious people doubting religious things. It's everybody doubting everything, right? Do you feel that at all? Do you guys feel that? Okay, so how did we get here? Can we do a brief history lesson to talk about how we got here? So the mid-15th century to the mid-20th century was what we called modernism, or the modern era. You've heard of things like the Industrial Revolution or the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. One of the big things to come out of modernism was this idea that we can know stuff. We can actually know things. You've heard of the idea of absolute truth, okay? Absolute truth rose to prominence during modernism. But after modernism, about the mid-20th century, along came postmodernism. And postmodernism was essentially modernism's punk rock skeptical nephew, okay? And if modernism said we can know stuff, postmodernism said you can't know anything. And everything that you think you know about absolutes and right and wrong is really just a power play by the government, who's ultimately trying to control you. And thus we had these bands called things like Rage Against the Machine. Any Rage Against the Machine people in here? Yeah, a couple. They normally attend the 11 o'clock. That's okay. But Rage Against the Machine would have never worked in modernism. In modernism, they would have said, why would we rage against the machine? We made the machines, but the machines are going great. We love the machines. But in postmodernism, they were apt to rage against the machine because postmodernism was radically skeptical. You see that? And make no mistake about it, our world that we live in today is decidedly postmodern, which is not all bad, other than the fact that on one hand, we have lost our sense of purpose and direction. We've lost kind of the grand narrative, because if there is no sense of right and wrong, then how do we even know like what we're doing? Like why am I here? Why do I belong? Where am I even going? How do I know where I'm headed? And it makes sense when you trace the timeline of it a little bit. So scholars say that postmodernism started in 1939. So you're fresh off the Great Depression. You're still recovering from World War I. And then what? Pearl Harbor, and then World War II, and then the Korean War, and then the Cold War, and then the assassination of MLK, the assassination of JFK, the Gulf War, and just when we thought we were safe, 9/11. Then we had about a 10-year gap where the biggest fight was between Kanye West and Taylor Swift. Those were the days. And then we traded Kanye and Taylor for Hillary and Donald Trump. And then COVID. Aren't you glad you came to church today for this encouraging message, right? My point is, it's not just religious people doubting religious things, it's everybody recovering from a lot of things. And because postmodernism has succeeded, or I would argue failed so miserably, historians say we have actually now moved on to a brand new chapter in history. This is true. Anybody know what it's called? This is really what it's called right here. Metamodernism. No, it is not sponsored by Facebook or the metaverse, though I understand the appeal, right? It's like, hey, would you like to live in a world that's not this one? Sure, I give that a shot, right? But this is the best definition I've been able to find for metamodernism, and this will make sense based off what we've been talking about. Similar to how postmodernism arose when people became dissatisfied with modernism's certainty, the frustration that, everything was so certain. Metamodernism arose when people became exhausted by postmodernism's skepticism. You have probably felt this change happen internally inside of you. In other words, because skepticism doesn't work, culture has moved on in search of a better story. It's trying to regain its sense of purpose and direction, placed kind of in the grand narrative. Postmodernism was all about looking in the self and kind of examining the self. They say metamodernism is going to be more about looking up and around and reaching out, which is really bad news for secularism. Because when people begin to reach out for God, they tend to find him. As one author said, because in him we live and move and have our being. No wonder Christianity, which is already the most practiced religion in the world today, 2.2 billion people, absolutely exploding in places like Africa and Asia and South America, is predicted and projected to grow to 3 billion people by the year 2050 and still be the world's most practiced religion 30 years from now. And why do I tell you that? A couple reasons. One, don't believe the lie that everybody's walking away from Christianity. They're not. And don't believe the lie that your faith that you grew up in can't work anymore. It still can. The question for us today is how? How can the faith that I grew up with still survive in a climate that's so skeptical and has had to endure so many difficult things? Well, in the series, we've been talking about 3 different worldviews, and I love this idea that anytime you run up against a problem, we got to examine it through 3 different worldviews. And there's the way of the world, which are the systems and practices that are without God entirely. There's the way of religion that it doesn't really, it's not ill-intentioned, but they distort God. And then there's the way of Jesus, that idea, the systems and practices that glorify God. And when it comes to a crisis of faith or examining how does my faith survive with all the problems in the world, the way of religion would be denial. If you're taking notes, you can write that down. The way of religion would be denial, to pretend that there's no problem whatsoever, right? To put on our Sunday best and come in here and clean up the deal. I mean, you just screamed at everybody in the car, right? But come into church and put on our Sunday best and sing the songs, and it's kind of like the Lego movie, right? Because everything is awesome and everything is cool, and meanwhile, you're scrolling on your phone, you're like, everything is not awesome. The world is on fire. But the way of religion would prefer just to kind of put all the problems and questions, aside. And I understand it. I mean, especially in seminary studying, even the early church days, there was so much bad theology at the early church that the church had to kind of double down on our beliefs. But some of you have been burned by this because you kind of raised the red flag and said, I got these questions or these doubts, or I want to kind of challenge the way we do things. And you were told to just sort of put it away, right? The way of religion would be to say there's no problem at all. Meanwhile, the way of the world is always focused on the problem. Postmodernism is known for problematizing. It's exhausting. Postmodernism is always going to find the problem in arts, in music, in media, in politics, in city planning. And believe it or not, for some people, this even leads to that the church is the problem. That if you're having a crisis of faith, that what you need to do is sort of tear apart all of the beliefs you grew up with and sort of examine them all with skepticism and ultimately probably be left with nothing. There's some postmodern activists that started a whole movement around this. Guys like Derrida and Foucault, mostly French. That should have been a red flag, But he's a jerk. My roommate's from France. Look, we love French toast, French fries. We're not all anti all of it. But they started an entire movement around this, and you may have heard this, a bit of a trending topic, and the idea, the term is called deconstruction. Deconstruction is the process of systematically dissecting, doubting, questioning, and possibly rejecting the beliefs that you grew up with. Now, let me show you what this looks like. If you suffer from anxiety, by the way, the next couple of minutes are not going to be your favorite. You can just pretend like you're praying. Everyone will think you're incredibly spiritual. But anybody ever have your faith look like this? Just like a untouched Jenga board, just a perfect faith? No, okay. So the idea of deconstruction is this. There's so many things that just happen to our life that ultimately you just start taking pieces out. So this is the obvious one, but show of hands. COVID do a number on anybody's faith in here? Show of hands? Yeah, a couple of us. I thought so. All right, we're going to pull one out for COVID, pour one out for COVID. I'm actually going to do two for COVID because nobody could really agree on anything, and you could get yelled at in the grocery store for anything, really, regardless of what you believe, and a mask on or off, just depends how everybody's doing. What about this? The Bible, anybody ever try to use the Bible against you? They're like, hey, did Adam have a belly button? Because if he didn't, then like, you got to just throw the whole thing out. So I'm gonna pull one out for that. Or how'd they get the dinosaurs on the ark? I don't know. It doesn't really bother my faith, but I get it. How about that? Okay, some Christians in the room. How about this? Show of hands if you owned a Christian music CD in the 90s. I'm taking one out just for the quality of that thing, because it was not the best. But some of them, this, about a quarter of them aren't even Christians anymore, and so we got to examine that for sure. Probably because they didn't sell enough, so they're a little bitter, but that's fine. Anybody into politics? Yeah, a little bit. All right, raise your left hand if you voted for Biden, or your right hand if you vote. Don't you do that. Do not do that. You people are the problem. Okay. I got to pull one out for politics. Now look, we're joking around a little bit. Is this stressing anybody out so much? Okay. So I'm mostly joking around. But the truth is there's serious stuff too, right? I mean, we have loss and pain in the world. I just lost a loved one recently. That was not easy. I remember a couple years ago when all the racial injustice just began to swell, and I had a lot of pastor friends who I thought handled it really well, but not every Christian did, and I understand how that could be frustrating. Or maybe you have a friend or a family member who just kind of identifies in a kind of a non-traditional way, and the church hasn't always been kind to them. And the point is, you start pulling enough of these out, and the whole thing comes crumbling down. All right, if you've been praying, you can open your eyes. You're fake praying. The anxiety's over. So deconstruction is a bit of a buzzword right now, but the truth is people have been deconstructing their faith for decades. Right now we just have blogs and podcasts to be able to read all about it and keep up with their journey. In fact, this is the traditional story you hear about college, right? And my job at the church is to be our college director. The story you often hear is that Christians come to college with faith, and by the time they are done with school, they have lost their faith altogether. This is why my personal why for why I wake up every morning and come to the office and come to the church is to see that story reversed, right? To see students who come to college leave with even more faith, and to see students who come here without any faith at all leave with a growing relationship in Jesus. But I know that's not always the story. That's definitely not the goal of deconstruction. Deconstruction wants you to ultimately walk away from your faith altogether, to which most of us would say, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not trying to walk away from my faith altogether, but that's part of the clever branding of deconstruction, right? Because in construction world, they don't actually call it deconstruction. When they're knocking a building down, it's another D word, starts with DE. Anybody know what it's called? Demolition, right? But if I said, James David Carter, how would you like to demolish your faith this morning? What would you say? Yeah, no thank you, right? But if I said, would you like to deconstruct your faith? Well, it sounds a little more educated, doesn't it, right? It sounds a little more chic, a little more nouveau, right? It sounds like a little more FOMO, like maybe everybody else is doing it. Now, in psychology, there's a whole other term for this, and they call it identity foreclosure. I'm really fascinated by this idea. The idea that I grew up with one identity as a child, but this identity no longer works for me anymore, right? And so in our case today, that idea of maybe I need to do an appraisal on my faith, and perhaps you're upside down. And what deconstruction would tell you is that your best move is just to walk away altogether, to cut your losses here. It's really sad. Deconstruction is incredibly personal. And I love this, just the honesty of this quote. This is a quote from an author named Sarah Bessey. This is what she said. She said, I think there is always a sense of grief that comes along with deconstruction. I think a lot of times we have that sort of feeling that we only have one of two options. That's the two we've been talking about right here. Which is either, right, the way of religion, to double down and pretend that everything's fine and stuff your questions down and your doubts and things where you feel like maybe it doesn't add up. Or option number two, right, you feel like you don't belong anymore. There's always a sense of loss and sadness anytime you foreclose on anything, but especially when you consider foreclosing on your faith. And I'm going to put all my cards on the table this morning, and this will not be a surprise as the pastor guy on the stage today. But I don't want you to foreclose on your faith. And if we're honest, you potentially feel like a lot of people I know, which is stuck between one of two bad options. Option number one is to pretend like I don't have any questions or doubts or challenges and just sort of ignore the problem altogether. Or option number two, which is just to question the whole thing and just ultimately walk away. But neither one of those feels sincere or authentic because deep down I still do believe. And the thing that I've been so excited to come today and tell you about is that in fact there is a third option, and it's the way of Jesus. And wouldn't you know, Jesus has a teaching about this in Luke chapter 11. I want to show it to you briefly. So the people he's speaking to are radically skeptical. Ultimately, they're trying to get rid of him. He's doing all these miracles. He's casting out demons, which is not a part of our regular schedule here at Athens Church. You know, Thursdays at 2, you come on by, we can do that. But that was part of, a part of the ministry that he would do. People had these impure spirits, and he'd help them get rid of them. And ultimately, they accused him of being the devil because he was casting out the demons. If he's casting out demons, he must be the devil. To which Jesus, who I think is sometimes he sounds so sarcastic, and it's one of the things I love about him. He says, could be, or perhaps, this is what he says, read it for yourself, Luke 11, or perhaps the kingdom of God has actually come upon you. I love that. That's an encouraging thought for somebody today, right? Like, what if it's actually all true? What if it's all real? Hope, heaven, right? Faith, the Bible. So in this climate where he's casting out demons and they're trying to get rid of him, this is what he says in verse 24. This is so interesting, and I just felt drawn to this text for us today. He gives a teaching, and he says, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places, seeking rest, does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. Some translations say my house. How does that make you feel, that some sort of demonic force would view you as their house? Next slide. When it arrives, it finds the house swept clean and put in order, right? Ready to list. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. Next slide. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. All right, what's the problem here? So the impure spirit goes out of the person, comes back around, and I'm all cleaned up, ready to go, new year, new me. And the spirit comes back and brings 7 of his friends, and I'm actually worse off than before. What's the problem? What happened? Okay, Matthew's gospel has an account of the story as well. Same story, just from Matthew's perspective, but he gives one extra word clue that I think is really interesting and really hopefully helpful for somebody today. This is Matthew 12, beginning in verse 43. Same story. When an evil spirit comes out of a man, because it's typically in a man, I like that he acknowledges that. Thank you. We have our days too, right? It goes through arid places, seeking rest, and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. Next slide. When it arrives, it finds the house, there's our word, unoccupied, swept clean and put in order. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. Next slide. And the final condition of that man is worse than the first. We got rid of the demons, okay? But we didn't put anything else in there. What's the point of the story? This is the preferred state of most people in our world today. No demon, but no Christ. And what Jesus is telling us in this parable is, look, evict every single thing that's evil in your life, right? Turn over every table that you have to. I certainly did, right? But do it to make a home for me too. Don't get rid of me too. Our first house we ever owned was this kind of fixer-upper brick ranch thing, and we moved in. Our oldest daughter was 6 months old, and this was pre-fake news. And we had this flower bed, and flower bed is a generous term because all it really ever had was weeds and mulch. And because young family, young kids, and all that, all we ever had the time to do was essentially pull the weeds, and there was just mulch, and the weeds would grow back. We'd pull the weeds and be mulch, pull the weeds and mulch, and then finally, when it was time to sell the house, we planted these beautiful hydrangeas, and the house sold for way more than it should have. And it's a great time to do that, by the way. But I feel like the word for somebody today in this passage is this. All of your religious efforts lately have been pulling weeds. Okay, but your religion can't be all subtraction. It's got to be addition too. You got to pull the weeds, but you got to add something in there too. You got to plant something too. Deconstruction by itself is incomplete. You've lived this, a lot of you. It's literally all pain and no gain. And so what I want to invite you into today, if your faith is stuck and you're trying to go from stuck to unstuck, would be to the next step of the process, which is reconstruction. I love this, the idea of returning to your old faith in a new way. Psychologists talk about it as a 3-step process: construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction. Maybe you're here and you didn't even grow up in church, right? But you grew up with an image of God. You constructed an idea of God or Jesus or the Bible, and now you've been deconstructing that. And the invitation today is to reconstruct it, right? Deconstruction always implies reconstruction. Anytime you see construction, the natural question to ask is what's going in, right? So you drive down Alps Road and they knock down into Noco, and the natural question is to go, what's going in? Hope it's another bowl place, right? We got Chipotle and Cava. We're on a roll. I love Cava, by the way. Huge fan. Don't get me started on that. Got an ad on my Instagram the other day. It said, it was very strange. It said, justify your love for Cava. It was like, I don't have to justify my love to Cava for anybody, right? Cava knows. I know. Everybody in my life knows. But you go down Alps Road and you see them knock something down. And what is it? Oh, it's going to be an REI. Oh, it's a new Athens church. How awesome is that, right? Anytime you see deconstruction, the natural question is, so what's going in? My buddy was in town the other day from Atlanta. We're walking downtown and we see all the Clayton Street construction, to which he says, well, what's going on here? And I'm like, what do you mean? You don't love it? Like, this is it. It's not Atlanta, Like, no, that would be stupid. It's clearly not done. I had to sell them on the whole deal. Well, it was beautiful when they knocked it down, and it's going to be even better, and the sidewalks are wider, and the trees are coming back, they tell us, But deconstruction always implies reconstruction, that question of what's going in. So the question for you today, and the question for me today, is what are we doing to rebuild our faith? Or what could we do, right? What can you do? What's something you could start doing? What's a step you could take today? Because all of your energy's been about tearing it down, right? We've been pulling piece by piece, and culture's been helping you, right? Current events have been helping you, and that's fine. But that's just a phase. And after deconstruction comes reconstruction. So what can you do today? What could you do this afternoon? What could you do tonight to start rebuilding your faith, to put the pieces back together? What would that look like practically? I love, I got one more verse I'm going to show you that I feel like is just so practical. It's amazing how these timeless scriptures from 2,000 years ago are so relevant to our life today. But the Apostle Paul wrote this to the church in Thessalonica in one of his letters to them, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And this is what he says. This is cool. It says, we're going to talk about what this means practically. Do not treat prophecies with contempt. Okay, prophecy is that idea of a religious teaching, a religious word or instruction. Somebody's speaking a religious idea to you. Don't treat it with contempt. Contempt is that feeling that I'm better than that. Like that doesn't have any value to me. Like I'm better than you. It's like, what? You vacation where? Okay, we vacation in 30A. So you're from where? You're from West Cobb? We're from East Cobb. You live where? You live at the Mark? Okay, we live at the Standard. It's called the Standard because it's the Standard. You know what I mean? That's the feeling. That's what contempt is. Contempt is that idea that like this doesn't have any value for me, that I'm here and you're here. And the fact that he's got to tell them this is just proof that people do this all the time with religion. And if we're honest, many of us have spent many years now doing this with religion, perhaps the religion that you grew up with, right? You used to respect it, and now it's like you're here and it's here. And he's going, don't do that, right? Don't do that. And then he gives us such practical advice. This is what he says. Instead, test them all. Hold on to what is good and reject every kind of evil, right? In other words, it's not either or. It's not ignore all the problems and hold on to everything and preserve. And it's not burn the whole thing down either, right? And walk away from our faith altogether. It's a beautiful mix of both. You gotta hold on to what is good and reject every kind of evil. And if we're honest, we've kind of leaned here a little bit lately as a culture. We've kind of leaned here a little bit lately as a cancel culture and to reject everything. And he's going, come on, hold on to what is good. You can't just cast out the demons. You can't just pull the weeds. You got to keep some stuff too. Don't get rid of Jesus either. Let's build it back up. Now we're going to close with a song. But for many of us here, or a lot of us here, today's message is like bullseye for your life the last few years. This is exactly you. And for a lot of you, it's honestly because you've had some church trauma in your life. And if that's you, I want to just tell you I'm so sorry. I don't think any of the pastors in your life were ever ill-intentioned, but I know we don't always get it right. Potentially somebody like me up here with a microphone that said or did some things that hurt you. And I want to tell you, I'm so sorry, but I'm so glad that you're here. And I want to help you begin to put some of the pieces back together and go from deconstruction to reconstruction. So before we sing this closing song, I wanted to give you just 4 things, just 4 kind of practical things that we can do, that I'm trying to do in my own life personally, that I want to invite you into doing to help you go from being stuck to hopefully unstuck in your faith. And the first one is this: I want to invite you to take the next step beyond cynicism. To take the next step beyond cynicism. And the fact that you're cynical and been cynical lately, I don't hate that. I think it's actually proof that you believe, right? We love doubts at this church. We say doubt is like a prerequisite for faith. I feel the same is true with cynicism. The fact that you've been cynical is proof that there's a version of Christianity out there that you can see. We just haven't always hit it. And so it makes you cynical. But we've already talked about it today, that being skeptical and being cynical is not making anything better. So I want to invite you today to make a choice to lay it down. It's interesting, the scriptures talk about the 3 things that last forever. You know what they are? Faith, hope, and love. How cool is that? That the 3 things that we want the most, faith, hope, and love, are the 3 things that last forever. But you can't have those things and be cynical at the same time. You can't have faith while being cynical. You can't have hope while being cynical. You can't experience unconditional love while being cynical. So you have to make a choice today. I have to make a choice today to lay down our cynicism. And for some of us, we've been cynical for too long. And I want to set you free from that today, but you got to make that choice. Whatever the next step is, I'm going to take it. And related to that would be number 2, I want to invite you to channel your frustration into positive action. Anybody here who's frustrated with the global church or Christianity or anything like that? I want to invite you to channel your frustration into positive action. You may be like some people I know that feel torn, right? Because Christianity in some parts of the world has lost its reputation. So I don't necessarily want to associate with that, but it doesn't feel sincere to walk away from my faith altogether because I really do believe. There's another way. Join us in helping rebrand Christianity to the world. Can we do that on a global scale? I don't know. Can we do that on a city level? We already are. We're going to spend the next 10 years doing more and more of that with Athens, I Love You, and our campus at Beechwood. But I want to invite you to channel your frustration into positive action. Be for somebody else what you wish somebody was for you. Extend the love to somebody else that you wish they had extended to you. I remember I met a guy, had lunch at Panera one time. Had a bacon turkey Bravo. I remember like it was just yesterday. And he was telling me his stories. He had these awesome tattoos down both of his arms, tattoo sleeves. But a lot of his religious trauma was from the fact that the church he was at before kind of shunned him for that, said he wasn't welcome. So he didn't know what to do, because on one hand, he kind of just wanted to throw in the towel altogether, but that didn't feel right either, right? And I said, what I think you should do is I think you should grab a guest services t-shirt, preferably short sleeve. I think you need to stand at the front door of our church every single day and greet people on the way in, so the people who come in with their tattoos hidden know that they're actually welcome here. That's what it looks like to channel your frustration into positive action. The third thing is I want to invite you to use Reconstruction language, right? So you've been in this deconstruction journey for a while and things are kind of falling apart and you don't know what you believe, and don't ask me what I believe because I don't really know. You've said that, right, lately to somebody? I want to invite you to change the wording on that, right? I want to invite you to use Reconstruction language and say, I'm putting the pieces back together again. Like, I'm building my faith back up again. The fact that you're here, been coming lately, the fact that somebody sent you this and you made it this far into the message is proof that that's probably true. And it's going to feel better to say those things, right? I'm seeking, I'm learning, I'm growing, but it's true about you. It doesn't just feel good. That's actually true. That's actually the journey that you're on. Your faith is no longer on the downslope. You're building it back up. I want to invite you to start talking like that again. And last thing, I want to invite you to pursue Jesus. We already sang about it. Pursue Jesus over certainty. We know certainty is not possible, right? That's why postmodernism got so popular for a while, right? But what other alternative do we have, right? We could just stop the pursuit altogether, but that doesn't work. I want to invite you to pursue Jesus over all of that. I know there's a lot of unanswered questions. The way of religion would love to kind of distract you with a lot of secondary issues that honestly just don't matter as much. I want to invite you to pursue Jesus over certainty. And the more that you get to know him, the more all the other questions and doubts and concerns honestly will just get a little bit smaller. Pursue Jesus. Did God really come incarnate in a man? What did he really say? How did he really live? Why did he die? And did he actually rise again? And I want to tell you, we have one environment at our church specifically designed to help you do that, and it's called Starting Point. And Starting Point is specifically, we say, for people who are seeking, starting, or restarting a relationship with God. It doesn't last forever. It's a short-term kind of small group meets here at the church. And y'all, we have an orientation today, after church today. And if you have never done that and you are like, I'm in one of those categories, seeking, starting, returning, I beg you, go to the orientation. You don't have to sign your life away. I'm not saying you got to make it all 6 weeks of the group or whatever, but I'm saying, will you give 5 minutes after church today to go to that orientation? It could help you. 6 weeks from now, your faith could be in a totally different place. Starting Point is designed to help you re-engage with your old faith in a new way. We say that no question is out of bounds. You can ask whatever you want. All the leaders in Starting Point have gone through it before. But here's what's cool. It's not a class. You'll learn a bunch. Honestly, you'll gain a lot more confidence in your faith. You'll gain a lot more peace. But it's not a class. It's a community. And for a lot of us who are here today and you are coming from a bad church experience or some religious trauma, I'm gonna be very honest with you. The only way to heal from an unhealthy church environment is to get plugged into a healthy church environment. I've never seen it happen any other way. And that's what Starting Point can be for you. So I want you to consider sticking around and doing that orientation. I hope you will. The truth is, many of us feel like we have this much faith left. Maybe you came in with here and hopefully we got it to here. Starting Point will take you even further. But if that's you, I just want to tell you, God is pleased with your faith. God is pleased that you've been holding on. And with all the things working against your faith, the fact that you keep taking steps, God is pleased with you. And if you reach out for him, I promise you will find him. You take a step into something like Starting Point, you will learn more about him. But it's going to take some work. It's going to require a little bit of change. Are you willing to take the next step beyond cynicism? To go, I've been cynical long enough and I got 1,000 good reasons. I don't know what your blocks were. Right? I don't know what your Jenga pieces were. I know they're real. But to go, cynicism is not helping me. It's not helping me rebuild. Are you willing to channel your frustration into positive action? Are you willing to use that language of reconstruction, not just because it feels good, but because it's true about you now? And are you willing to pursue the person of Jesus above everything else? Potentially through a place like Starting Point. We're going to close with this song. I love the idea of this song. The opportunity to lay down our doubts, to lay down all the things we know as well. And the chorus says, I'm going to make room for you. It's just what we talked about in that verse. But I'm not making room. I'm not cleaning up my life just so I'm good on my own. I'm cleaning up my life and my heart so that my heart can be as pure as possible for Christ Jesus to live in me and do a new work in me. And I want to predict that for you. That if you do some of the things we're talking about today, that God is going to do a new work in you. And you'll be able to look back to today. You'll be able to look back to your Starting Point group and know that this is when it started. But I want to pray for you before we sing this song. Let's pray. God, thanks that you're on the journey with us. Thanks that this is such a safe place to ask questions and doubts, that we don't have to pretend like we're anything other than we're not. Thank you just that this is a room of 1,000-something very imperfect people, very redeemed by your grace and love. And I know there's a lot of people who have come from a lot of baggage, a lot of pain from the church and outside the church and the world. And the way of the world would love to use those against their faith, but I pray that would not happen. But that you would use this church, this community, and ultimately just yourself and your word and your spirit to lead us back into a growing relationship with you. Help us build back up our faith today and walk in the way of Jesus, which is better. Your way is better. Your way is better. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.